So we have two beakers. One is filled with distilled water and the other is filled with our solution. This pipette is a serological pipette. This is a volumetric pipette. This is a disposable pipette. We have a cuvette, 5 test tubes, and 2 manual pipette fillers.
Disposable pipettes can be used for non-quantitative transfers, such as filling up a cuvette. For example, we can take this beaker of distilled water, fill it up, just like that, open up the cuvette, and fill it to a volume that we think is adequate for calibration. You can use the disposable pipette for the same solution over and over until you've filled it up. So for example, if you're just filling up cuvettes with distilled water, you can use the same disposable pipette. But if you're using a different solution or a solution with a different concentration, then you have to change your disposable pipette. You would just throw this in the trash since it's plastic and therefore disposable. So next we're going to be talking about using the serological pipette. Now earlier we showed that we have 2 manual pipette fillers, but each one is specific to which type of pipette. For the serological pipette, we will be using the red one. Now first you attach the serological pipette to the pipette filler. Make sure it's firmly in there and that there's no air bubbles or anything like that. To use the manual pipette fillers, you simply move this up to draw in the liquid and then press this to release the liquid. And then make sure when you fill up the pipette again that this is all the way down. So serological pipettes can be used for more quantitative transfers that don't have to be exact but still have to be more precise than a disposable pipette. For example, making dilutions. You can use a serological pipette to first make a set of dilutions by filling up, say, 1 millimeter of distilled water. To fill up 1 millimeter of distilled water, you would fill the pipette to the 9 millimeter mark. It's out of 10 millimeters, but it goes in reverse. So up here would be 10 millimeters, 9, 8, 7, and so on. If it's at the 9 millimeter mark, that means you have 1 millimeter in the pipette. Then you would go into the test tube and press the release button in order to drain out the liquid. And you would do this over and over, so on. You would go up to 2 millimeters, release into the test tube, and etc., etc. Then if you want to fill up another solution into the same test tubes to create a dilution, if it was a solution such as the blue one in between that you used first, you would have to first rinse out the pipette with distilled water to make sure that no solution is left in there before filling it up with the distilled water. But as I started with the distilled water, I can immediately go over to the solution and begin to make my dilutions. And that's how you use a serological pipette. So now we're going to be talking about the volumetric pipettes. This pipette is used for very, very precise transfers of a solution, and it can only be used for a certain volume. The volume that it can be used for will usually be listed towards the top of the pipette. For example, this pipette is for 5 millimeters and it can only be used at 20 degrees Celsius. Now, while these pipettes are very exact, these pipettes cannot always be used. A volumetric pipette is for 5 millimeters, 25 millimeters, 200, 250, etc. But say, for example, you need to make a solution that requires 3.6 millimeters of distilled water exactly. You're not going to find a volumetric pipette with exactly 3.6 millimeters. So you're just going to have to risk it and use a serological pipette. Now, these pipettes are still very precise, and for this one in the demonstration, I will be using a manual pipette filler that is green, therefore demonstrating it's a different size than the red one. So I'll simply transfer over 5 millimeters of this solution into a test tube. You use this manual pipette filler in the same way as the other red one. You raise the top to fill it up, to fill the pipette up. Now, this pipette has absolutely no markings on it. It has a single bulb, and up towards the top it has a single white line that represents the marking for where it's going to be 5 millimeters. So you bring it up close to the marking, and then you raise it up, and if you see if it's close to the marking, exactly on that line. Therefore, you filled up 5 millimeters in the volumetric pipette. Then you go over to the test tube, Press the release button and fill the test tube with 5 milliliters of the solution. For this one, you have to make sure every last drop is out, as it will be said on the pipette if you need to do that or not. For serological pipettes, you often don't need to do that because they are designed to be that you can have one last drop remaining in the pipette. And that's how you use a serological pipette.